The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents a discussion with Bianca. Hey everybody, welcome. It's time for another one of the things that I'm very fortunate to be able to do, which is to sit down and interview somebody who I get to work with. And in this case, somebody else who's fairly new to both the atheist community of Austin. You're now one of the co-hosts on Talk Heathen.
Yes, I am.
And I figured we'd just kind of do the background discussion that introduces everybody to who you are and why they should care.
Sounds
Apart
good.
from the fact that you're on Talk Heathen.
That's the only reason you guys should care.
We actually did, was it last Sunday?
2 Sundays. Last Sunday was
Oh,
Halloween.
two Sundays ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and I did Talk Heathen together. I loved it. It was fun.
It was a lot of fun.
And you sat in the host chair and were like, take no nonsense. She knows how to shut me down when she needs to and everything else. But just for people who are doing this, obviously this is for the Atheist Debates Project, and I spend a lot of time debating and talking about all that. It's what we do on the shows, but in a kind of a different way.
Yeah.
But why don't we start with, what was your background with regard to religion? What age were you introduced to it, and what type, and your family's thoughts on that?
Yeah. I grew up very conservative Christian, non-denominational, which I've been told.
Well, there's your problem.
Yep. I've been told that means Southern Baptist, but with better communion food. Because we got McDonald's on the way to church.
We got McDonald's on the way to church.
All right, fine, then just Southern Baptist then.
I remember. So on the bus to church, when we go to children's church, I remember stopping at McDonald's and then buying a cheeseburger for everybody on the bus.
Yep.
And I think we actually stopped there sometimes on the way home for the little ice cream cones as well. I mean, that's how they get you.
It is. That was how they did it. But yeah, it was an intense environment. I actually was on a talk earlier today with the Mindship podcast, Clint Heacock, I think. Forgive me, Clint, if that's the wrong pronunciation of your last name. But we talked a little bit about the concept of family cults and religious trauma and all of that. So yeah, my family was pretty cultish in that regard. My dad decided when I was 10-ish that he didn't like the way any of the pastors of the churches we were going to were talking about God. So he was like, I'm going to do this myself. So he started a little home church, and it was me, my 5 younger siblings, my mom, and him, and then maybe 3 or 4 other people, if that. So that was my church background. I was also homeschooled by my mom, so there wasn't much outside of the immediate family.
You're making me almost believe in miracles at this point, because when you hear stories like that about, not only was I homeschooled, but I was home churched from 10 with my siblings and a couple other people.
Yep.
Yeah. So what was that like? I mean, when I have family members who have homeschooled. I also know some atheists who homeschool. Mm-hmm. I have a bunch of problems with homeschooling, mainly with regard to oversight and testing and ensuring that we're meeting our responsibility to teach kids stuff. How did that work out for you? Did you feel like you were missing something, or at the time did it feel like this is just normal? No,
at the time it felt completely normal. The only clue that I had was movies and books where people talked about public school, and that was always supposed to be
Friends.
Something that was, and Friends and prom and all of these concepts that were just what is this world that's so dangerous and scary and slightly fascinating.
Now, how long were you homeschooled all the way through high school?
All the way through. Last year I did cyber school, so I went to an accredited school, but it was still from home.
So you didn't get to so you mentioned prom. Is that a sticking point? Is that why it came up? Because once you found out that there was a prom, that you didn't get to prom?
I was like, I've never gotten a prom, which is fine, because it would have been really awkward when I showed up in a tux anyway. But I did until first year of college. I hadn't spent a night away from home, so it was a new experience out there. But yeah, at the time it felt completely normal. It wasn't something that I was aware other people thought was weird.
Yeah. I remember, so we went to Skepticon a few years in a row, and one of the things that Beth really wanted to do was an adult prom, in part because, I think she got to go to prom or homecoming or something like that, but she knew a bunch of people who didn't, and we had heard stories from other people, so Skepticon put on Skeptiprom.
I love it.
And we went, had a blast. I've got a plum-colored velvet, jacket, and Beth had this massive yellow quinceañera dress.
Of course,
that was
yeah.
because that's there she is, and it was great. So you finish up your last year of cyber high school homeschool.
Yep.
And then what?
And then I started looking at colleges, which was by itself huge. Up until I was 16 or 17, my dad was adamant I wasn't going to college because why'd I need that? They were gonna find someone for me to start courting and seeing with the intention of marrying me off, and we had a family business, vending machines, that I was supposed to take over. So it was like up to a certain point I wasn't even going. Which was fine because the end of the world was supposed to happen around that time anyway. So I was just going to get raptured, so that was a thing.
This was going to be just a quick, give me your background, and now I have about 3 million questions.
Give me the question.
On this doomsday home cult.
Yep.
So your dad didn't like what the preachers were preaching, and
Yeah.
around the age of 10, he just basically started a church where he was the preacher. And so obviously you mentioned that you thought the rapture was coming in the end of the world, and that was coming soon.
Yeah.
And
To a theater near you.
yeah, would they have been in agreement with Harold Camping and those guys who were, because we had the rapture ram in Oakland when the world was supposed to end, and it didn't in 2012, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, 2012 was supposed to be a big deal for my family too. We had people online offering us their bomb shelter in Canada. We had some guy, I to this day don't know who, a family friend that I'd never seen before, come down into our basement and show us where to hide and where to hide the guns and where to stock all of the food for when the world went crazy and we were all stuck in the basement. So
this is going to be a series of 3 videos. I already know. So, and it's interesting because you and I have been interacting off and on since we met at one of the American Atheist conventions.
This
year. This last one for the first time, and then you moved down to Austin and got involved there. We're going to get through to all the elements of the story, but it just occurred to me there's just massive amounts of stuff that I have no idea about because I grew up as a fairly conventional Southern Baptist. Mm-hmm. Probably the most unconventional things were my mom's side of the family played cards, and so I wasn't prohibited from playing cards and had a deck in my hand from the time I was 3. And while there were Southern Baptist churches that were against dancing, my mom and dad had both loved to dance and go to their dances, and they danced at their wedding and everything. So that was never a prohibited thing. So
dancing and cards.
I got to do dancing and cards. Now, alcohol was strictly forbidden.
Yeah.
But so if the plan was the world's probably going to end, but even if it doesn't, you don't need to go to college because we're just going to marry you off.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming it was a fairly. How did you broach the subject of going to college with your dad if that's the mindset that he has? Were you worried about even talking about it, or was this? There's 2 ways this can go, which is this is the way things are going to be, and this is the plan, but you still have your freedom.
Right. It was there was an interesting family dynamic where it was absolute control, bite model level of manipulation until you turned 18, and then it was hands off.
It sounds a lot closer to Mennonite and Amish, where you get your year or your time to go out and sow your wild oats or whatever.
Also, I do have to say my Opa, my mom's dad, who passed away, I think 2008, he was a huge instigator in the whole college thing. He heard that and he was like, no, she's getting an education. So these conversations were all happening over my head. I didn't have that say or that clout. But thankfully, that was
You needed somebody with more power to kind of vouch for you.
Yeah, exactly. And they had this weird, power dynamic type relationship. And I think it was like more of a dare, like let her go or else. At least that's how I've been told it went. And so I started looking at colleges after graduating, and I was told that if I didn't go to the Christian college down the street, I would be in direct violation of my dad's wishes, even though I had gotten accepted to a college 2 hours away. That was just, public college. Mm-hmm. So I took on a massive amount of debt and went to this private Christian school. And yeah, that was my first experience anything. So I basically went through high school level social anxiety and inability to cope with like other people relationships while also being in college and away from the family for the first time.
Yeah, and you talk about taking on a bunch of debt to do this. Mm-hmm. If with the college that was 2 hours away, would that have been cheaper to go to?
Oh, yeah, by a lot.
And I'm taking it that you essentially had to pay for college entirely yourself.
Oh yeah, there was no help. Like my mom helped fill out the FAFSA forms,
sure.
But other than that, it was on me, which ended up being okay because I had a lot of friends at that school whose parents were paying, and so they could make choices for their kids. Like, I don't want you to go abroad. I don't want you to do this or take that class. And for me, even though like now, yay, I'll have this debt forever. At the time, it was like, okay, I can do what I want here because
it's a Christian school. It's safe.
Ho, 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 ho.
That doesn't fly with somebody who's already decided that the preachers that he had before weren't good enough.
No, it was an interesting. Well, the college itself was completely dry. No drugs, no alcohol, even off campus. You had to sign a pledge that for the 4 years you were there, you would not drink, do drugs, have sex, engage in homosexual activity, and a bunch of other things.
I'm going to guess that you broke some of those at some point, but... Yeah.
Funny story, they could fine you more. They actually had this on the books. They would fine you more for saying fuck than for getting caught fucking. But they would fine you. So technically, you could pay them $30 and then go fuck somebody. Which is basically prostitution. So it's shaky ground.
The church
there.
is the pimp. You can have consensual sex with somebody else if you give us $30.
Yep, basically.
And I got to say, if you're going to set up a fine system, that doesn't seem to be much of an incentive to not do it.
Right?
I mean, I know, I get it, you're poor college students and everything else, but, $30, and that's only if you get caught.
Right. It's like, oh, sex is sacred. Never, ever do it because it's a communion between you, your partner, and God. And also, it's only worth $30.
It reminds me of like the Father Guido Sarducci comedy bit, which is way older than you, so won't be surprised if you don't know it. But he would do his shtick in a priest costume, with a hat and smoking a cigarette. And he had this thing about, how much it cost for each sin. I'll look it up and show it to you sometime because it's funny. So you get out. I'm assuming the college down the street, you were still living with your parents at the time? Or?
I was living in the dorms, which was a non-negotiable for me. I was like, I have to at least do that.
Yeah.
But I was home every weekend.
Sure.
So yeah, it was enough of a commute that they could keep an eye on me, and I would be expected to be home for anything that they needed. But I did get to live on campus, which ended up being good. And yeah, that was my first experience kind of being around other Christians of other denominations and people who were more progressive than me, which wasn't hard to do at that point. Like at that point, you could say like gay people are cool and I would be like just floored. And so it was a very slow process of reevaluating things based on what my other Christian friends that I was now living with and working with were telling me about their beliefs and their version of God.
How many, I don't know, were you the only one of like all your friends who had been in like a homeschooled environment?
Yeah, and I kept it on the down low. Like there were some homeschooled kids.
Sure.
And then there was me. And I also probably at the time screamed homeschool kid, but I was like, no, I'm cool like you guys. It's fine.
So I know, when I grew up, Yeah, it was a conservative, fundamentalist Southern Baptist church.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't stop kids from being kids, and so we all were. And you knew who'd gone to second base and who'd gone to third base and who had actually done it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd go to, like, we went to summer camp
Mm-hmm.
in Lake of the Ozarks as a Camp Windermere. And our group, you know, we were just being kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the church's job was to kind of guilt you into recognizing
Right.
that you were being sinful, and then you'd rededicate your life, and you'd have all these other things. When you're at college and you start running into kids who, I'm assuming, had backgrounds far closer to mine, so they were probably wilder from the get-go.
Yeah.
How did you take that?
I was probably, looking back, kind of a bit of a dick, a little bit of a snob. I would stay away from anybody who was too out there. I remember that there was this one kid, and in my head, he's like so much older than me, but like looking back, he was like 20. But he shows up on campus with like bright blue hair and earrings and nail polish and just the most fabulous person. And I was terrified, absolutely like shaking in my boots, terrified, because I really liked him and I wanted to hang out with him. And he sensed it, and he was like relentlessly nice to me, which, thank you. But I remember having these conversations with my mom where I'm like, I don't know what to do. I want to be this person's friend, and I think he's really nice, and like, I want to hang out, but also he's gay. And she would be like, it's okay, you can be nice to him, just don't get too close.
Love the sinner, hate the sin type
Exactly.
thing. Maybe you can bring him back. Maybe you can help.
Exactly. Yeah.
So at what point, and I don't know if this happened while you were at college or afterwards, but at what point did you start kind of doubting religion in any context?
That did happen in college over a course of like 2 years, because my degree, undergrad degree, is in journalism, which actually was a decent program. I think some of the professors in the journalism department were fairly secular and had to keep it on the down low because I didn't
Sure.
like professors doing that. But like, I had one professor who was like, here, watch this documentary about how crap Fox News is. And also like, let's watch this George Carlin clip about where he mocks religion for class. So I was like, thinking back, I'm like, okay.
I just love the fact
Alright.
that there's a Christian college out there where George Carlin is part of the curriculum.
Yeah. Yep. But so in these journalism classes, I was being taught the ethics of good journalism, which are, you know, go to primary sources. Everyone has a bias. Be objective if you possibly can. Like, critique everything. Ask these kinds of questions. Listen really carefully for discrepancies. So, like, all of these things that is good in investigative journalism. And then, concurrently, I was required to take theology classes.
Right.
And Bible classes.
Right.
Yep.
And the journalist in you
And
paid attention.
I was taking the things I was learning and applying them and being like, like slapped on the wrist. Like, we don't talk about that kind of thing here. Or
Wow.
like, it was either like fluffy God works in mysterious ways type thing,
Right.
or it was like, here, let me fill up 3 blackboards with like doodles and etches and graphs to explain this very simple concept that like should be, you know, logically obvious. So that was like the first kind of drop in the bucket of like, something's not adding up here. We should have the answers to these basic questions. And then I went to London in 2014 for a semester. And I to this day don't know why this happened, when it did or how it did, but I like to say I had an irreligious experience. So whenever anyone comes at me with like, but I felt this, I was like, okay, well, I have a story about that too, but it led me in the opposite direction. I was looking for a church to go to, and I had been for months, and nothing was sticking. I went to every possible kind of church you could imagine. And so I was going out with a friend to an Anglican church, one of the more modern ones.
Right.
And we get there, and there's like smoke machines and color coordinated dance numbers and like chocolate croissants, and it's like a party, you know, and it didn't feel right. And the entire day I was kind of like, this is odd, this is weird. But maybe when the preacher comes in, he will give a sermon that is good and will ground me, and I will feel at home here like I'm supposed to. And when it came time for it, a giant screen comes down, bigger than the entire like flat I was staying at the time, and he's Skyping in from another location.
Oh, this is one of the annexes for the mega.
Yeah.
There's actually in Austin. There's some churches like this too, where there's several campuses, and the preacher will be at the main campus, and they will just Skype the sermon to the annex campuses.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was about that experience, but all of a sudden, you know the feeling of like waking up in a room that isn't yours and being very confused as to where you are for like 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
It was that feeling. Like all of a sudden, I was like. It was like instant wake up, like, where am I? What am I doing? Who are these people? Why am I here?
Sure.
And I shut down. On the tube ride back, absolutely quiet. My friend is like, are you okay? And then I get home, I collapse onto the floor. I'm just absolutely numb for like 2 hours. And all I can think is like, he's gone. He's gone. Not, he doesn't exist, but God is gone. He's not here with me anymore. And it was the most awful feeling.
You might be the first person I ever talked to who described that feeling in that way. Because, so my process, it was kind of academic. It took about a year and a half. There were many times where I would, basically be on my knees and begging for God,
Yeah.
Could you just answer this one thing?
Yep.
Because I'm trying to do what you want me to do. Could you just answer this one thing? And I would get nothing.
Yeah.
And of course, I felt this was my fault. There was something wrong with me that was keeping God from actually talking to me. And so it wasn't that I felt God didn't exist or went away. It's as if God was standing there going, nope, not yet. Nope, not going to talk to you yet. Nope, nope. And then when I realized eventually kind of the absurdity, then it definitely wasn't that God just went away. It was like, oh, God was actually never here. And
right.
so to hear you talk about God going away, I wonder, obviously we didn't dig on every doctrinal point that your father taught, but I wonder if that incredibly insulated environment made dealing with fairly normal in the modern world, church experiences, far more difficult. It makes. I wonder if I've said before that fundamentalists are probably the primary target, because liberal and moderate theists, Christians in particular, they've already done this rationalizing tap dance.
Yeah.
So when they find out that the Earth isn't 6,000 to 10,000 years old, or that evolution is a fact,
wait, it's not.
It's not.
Oh my.
It's at least that old, so you don't have to panic. But when they find out those things, the view is kind of, oh yeah, well it's fine. God works in mystery, or God tinkered, or God did whatever, and so the things that you would point out are flaws have already been dealt with. Mm-hmm. And so the more rigid a structure you put up, the easier it is to actually knock down in one fell swoop, which is why so many of the activists that I've met and worked with, not only do I speak more in the South, in the Bible Belt area, than I've never been in New England. I've never spoken in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, etc. And so there seems to be a little bit more of a need here. But the people who find their way out of religion, who are the biggest activists, tend to come from more fundamentalist backgrounds, because when it all fell apart, it was more like a revelation than this gradual, well, yeah, perhaps I suspected that maybe there wasn't a God all this time, but the church was valuable and we were doing good service. And if it makes you happy, can't we just agree to disagree? I didn't have that. It was either this shit is real and it's the most important thing in the world, and there is a single path to salvation, and you're either going to be on that path or you're not, or it's not real.
Yeah. I mean, I went through both, because after this happened, I recouped, and I continued to call myself a Christian for years after that. And I didn't think about it again until after I left the practice altogether. But yeah, after that, I think what it was the emotional connection was gone to God, like the concept of God as a father or God as a friend was gone. And so it allowed me to kind of think about it more rationally.
Sure.
And so that's when I started having these deep theological conversations, philosophical conversations, doing all that research. You could have seen me coming to from the library to my apartment with like books up to here, just like on God, just like trying to like figure this shit out. And I was a progressive Christian for a while. I got to the point where I was so progressive that I looked back and I was like, 99% of Christians would call me a heretic at this point because nothing is doctrinally sound. Nothing is agreed upon in the church or the clergy or the dogma. I believed in everybody goes to heaven, like you just have different paths there, but like everyone is ultimately saved. That the concept of the vulnerable God instead of like the omnipotent one. And like as I was changing morally, as I was changing politically, I was continuing to adjust my religion to fit what I already knew inside to be more accurate.
It's the hard part because you can find verses to support any of those things.
Exactly.
When you go back to the Old Testament, you say, well, God's a jealous God. Well, hang on. Why would an omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing being, be jealous? What would there be to be jealous of?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. Jealous, we tend to look at it as kind of a bad thing. It's a possessive, emotional thing that shows insecurity on your part.
Right. There has to be something else there that is equally as potentially valuable in order for you to be jealous of something.
And the path that you kind of described is actually something that my friend Jerry DeWitt described in Hope After Faith and in discussions we had, and I won't get it exactly right because I don't have it in front of me, but he went from, everybody gets saved to, went through these steps to finally, God is just pretend sort of thing.
Right. It was like, oh, this is what everyone's doing. Oh, everyone is constructing their God out of the beliefs they already hold, and that's what I'm doing. So maybe it's just me in here.
Or maybe we're creating God, or God is the universe, or God is unknowable, but we should keep striving for it.
I went there too. Yeah. God is the universe thing. I think the thing that knocked that out of me was actually listening to AXP. And having, because I think I'm very similar in my deconversion to Tracy a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so that concept of, I was a universalist and like a pantheist for a while, and I was like, oh yeah, for sure. Like the universe is God, and when I say God, I mean the universe and all of that. And I was like, no, maybe not.
It's the things we tell ourselves to make, because if you're too rigid, mm-hmm. You've got to stay either committed to it, or decide that you care more about the truth, and just say, even if this is uncomfortable, even if it bothers me, I've got to let go of it. And so we're really good at rationalizing and lying to ourselves, and that's true for all of us, including me. We just sometimes do it in different ways. Some people are going to do it more with their religious beliefs. A good chunk of us are going to do it with interpersonal relationships. It's like, we're going to tolerate a lot more from people who are family, people who we love, and you're going to cut them a lot more slack, and the conversations with them are going to be different. It was the time that my mom sent me an email when I decided to reply to it as if she wasn't my mom, as if she was just some random person emailing the guy from the show. Right. And I wrote that email and I clicked send without proofreading or anything. Mm. And I thought I had ended my relationship with my mom. I've talked about it a handful of times, but I actually remember making that decision. It'd be like, I started typing a response and I was like, you're just softballing it. You're just coddling your mom.
Yeah.
If she actually cares about truth and wants to have these conversations, respond to her like you would anybody else. And I did. And it turned out to not be a bad thing or a good thing necessarily, but it put us in a position where we didn't talk about any of this for years, and let's talk about other stuff.
Yeah.
Because those conversations are uncomfortable for her. But
yeah. So
at some point, after going through these various stages, at what point did you just say, you know what, I don't believe it anymore. When did you latch on to the scary A word?
To the name. Yeah. I published a blog post in 2017, I think. I think it was something like why it's hard to become an atheist, what Christians don't understand and non-believers don't talk about.
Sure.
Because up to that point, my only interaction with atheists had been online people, the type like, people who are in religion are just stupid, and it's so easy to see the light, and like all of this stuff that totally ignores the fact that if you're grown up indoctrinated into this, it's actually quite a painful process to deconstruct everything and then build it back up. And I don't know why I chose to publish at that time, but within 15 minutes of me putting it out there and waiting, I had DM after DM from friends from that Christian school saying, me too. I thought I was the only one. And realizing that was an isolating thing, that we were right there with each other the whole time, struggling with the same exact questions, and we thought we were the only person on that campus with these thoughts because we weren't allowed to say the A word or even think it or apply it to us. So
and
that
if you
was
express
kinda...
those doubts, your college is in jeopardy.
Yep.
Your relationship with the people there is in jeopardy. Your relationship with family members is in jeopardy. Yeah, it's one thing that I don't have regrets. I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now if things hadn't happened the way they happened. But I was at least around 30, when I finally kind of found my way out of it. And that had been after many years of not particularly caring all that much. I mean, I believe, but I don't,
Right.
I got my life to live. I got my career to worry about. I'm doing this stuff. And it was when the career was taken away and I thought God was punishing me that I was like, okay, now I'm getting serious about it. And the only kind of deals I made I made deals with God, or tried to, but the only deal I made with myself was, no more, dishonesty or self-deception on this. You're going to follow the evidence where it leads. You care about what's true. And, you already know God's real. And so your roommate's an atheist. You got plenty of the other people. God wanted you to do this. So, there's just find the right evidence, find the right arguments, and go out and do what you're supposed to do. And so it became kind of like digging in even more on the Bible, which turned out to be great because I would start to realize, my dad's side of the family was Southern Baptist. My mom's side of the family was predominantly Catholic, at least in the extended family. And I knew what I had been raised with. I also took a comparative religions course in my freshman year of high school.
Okay.
And I can remember sitting there going, gosh, these people believe a lot of weird shit. Isn't it great that I have Jesus? I could have what if I'd have been born into a Hindu family? And the question I remember popping into my head, and the answer came, God didn't want you to. God made sure that you were with the right family. And that was it. There was no other thought on that at all.
Yeah.
And then it was, a decade later, or more than a decade later, when I was like, man, remember those thoughts you had back in high school? The answer that you settled on may not have been the right answer.
Yeah.
It may have been a little more complicated than that. And it was partially because I found writings of people online that were responding to the things that had been in my head all this time. And so you were doing something similar, albeit just a little later on the timeline. If you were able to listen to Atheist Experience, then it was a little bit further down the road.
A little bit further down, yeah. But yeah, no, I started publishing, and I was that annoying, like, kind of holier than thou. I went through that stage for sure. But yeah, I that was my passion for a while, just blogging about atheism and the concept of deconverting, because it was like cathartic for me to put it into words. And yeah, it's inspired a lot of interesting conversations, not just with people who also were feeling that way at the time, but also with people who there are very few people at my college who are still either fundamentalist. Most of them have moved into very highly progressive.
Are you still in touch with a few of them?
Oh, a lot of them actually.
The blue-haired guy?
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah. I think he's a middle school teacher now, somewhere up north. And I'm like, good for you.
Now, was he a closeted non-believer at the time, or is he still a believer now? And just
we haven't talked about that. I don't know.
It's curious because you make assumptions about things.
Right, exactly.
And I graduated, there were over 900 kids that graduated my year. They split the high school in half the year after that. And one of my best friends from high school, who remained one of my best friends, it's been a few years since we've been able to interact, but he was at my wedding. His dad made the cake for our wedding. We interacted back and forth, and I love him like a brother. It's just neither one of us are going to get mad because he's got 2 ex-wives and kids and other things, and he's got his life and I got my life. And if we ever get time, we will always hang out, and I'll message him every now and then. But I remember we were both raised Southern Baptist, and I had been taught by my mom and others that Catholicism was a Mary worshiping cult, a saint worshiping cult, and they weren't real Christians. And Catholics would say, we're not Christian, we're Catholic, even though you're Christian. In the grand scheme of things, there's the Christian envelope, and then there's Catholic and Protestant, and the subdivisions under there, and then it branches out from there. But whatever they call themselves. I remember he asked me when he found out I was an atheist, he was like, I just don't understand it. How could you be an atheist? I mean, you and I, we were raised the same. We were taught the same stuff. We believed the same stuff. And now you don't believe any of it? And I was like, yeah. And I said, I'm even more confused because after you got divorced, you married a woman who was Catholic, and now you're Catholic. You believe the same things about Catholicism that I did, but now you're Catholic. I don't understand how that works.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I like to drink, and they're okay with that. And I was like, really? You're confused that your friend took it seriously enough to study it and learn the arguments and the evidence and evaluate, and ultimately found out, I just can't believe this. And yet you're just like, I'll go with whatever religion lets me do what I want to do.
Yep.
And of course, he pointed out it's more than that. And I get it. It is more than that. But I love that his first answer was pretty honest and really showed the difference, because the truth is we were very much the same. And at the time, we didn't really take it all that seriously, other than all our friends with the church. We would do the church things. And when we were at church, we took it seriously.
Yeah.
And when we weren't at church, we had fun. And I'd love to say, how much more fun could we have had? Maybe too much fun. But it's still funny to me that I take it, I'm an atheist because I took this seriously.
Right.
And you became a Catholic because you married a Catholic and you like to have a drink every now and then.
Yeah.
I can have a drink every now and then. I could be married to a Catholic. I wouldn't probably, but I could. I got no restrictions like that. You just kind of eased up on this.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because there's not very many people that I'm in touch with from back then. And so it's nice to hear that you still are. And now you're living in Austin.
I am.
You are on Talk Heathen. You did AXP with me once.
Yeah.
How weird is that?
It's extremely surreal. It is very, very odd. Yeah, I can't believe I'm here, honestly. Like, I'll sit back some days just doing whatever it is I'm doing during the day and just be like, the fuck is my life right now? This is crazy.
Well, we're glad you're here. I'm going to go ahead and end this here because it's already like 35, 40 minutes or whatever else. And so we will continue with V's life story at another time. But really, no, I want to get into kind of this process. And because people who find their way out can do a lot of different things. And some of us get involved in activism. Some of us get involved in this kind of arguing and counter apologetics and stuff like that. Others don't. And maybe we'll sit down in a couple weeks and talk about the second half of this that led from the college catastrophe to being on Talk Heathen.
I would love that.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to get a couple other videos out. I'll be in Florida this coming weekend for Free Flow, although it's already sold out. And in 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks after I post this, the Saturday the 9th, Seth Andrews and I will be in Phoenix, Arizona. And then there's Friendmas coming up at ACA and all kinds of other stuff, and more videos next month. But take care. Bye-bye. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.